Let's go to Labor's Matt Thistlethwaite now, who joins me from the Sydney CBD. Thanks for joining us again, Matt. Pretty good to hear Anthony Albanese talking common sense on the coal industry.
Yeah, g'day, Chris. Anthony was pointing out in those interviews he did earlier this morning that Labor's always been a supporter of jobs in the mining industry and will continue to do so. But Anthony also made the point that if you look at internationally in terms of markets, that's a market that is changing and for a number of reasons. Environmental issues associated with the world coming to grips with climate change and the fact that over time we do have to reduce our reliance on burning fossil fuels. Automation that's coming into the industry, which is resulting in a lot of job losses, but also the fact that international investment markets are changing and you're seeing international investors pull out of coal resources throughout the world. Most notably, you're seeing BHP, Rio Tinto and Anglo-American starting to divest themselves of coal resources. So it's a changing industry. The question that really needs to be asked, Chris, is what is this government doing to support workers in that industry? Because they haven't been doing much at all, really, in terms of job losses.
Well, they support the Adani coal mine. Does Labor?
Well, Labor's position on the mine was very clear in the lead up to the election, that if it stacks up environmentally, if it stacks up in terms of the financing of it, then it would go ahead, and that's what's occurred. But if you look at the industry at the moment, BHP's just entered into an agreement to completely automate all of their works in the Bowen Basin. Now that's going to result in job losses. Rio Tinto got rid of 200 coal truck drivers in the Pilbara last year because of automation. This is coming for this industry. It's a change that's occurring in this industry that's going to result in job losses. Where's the government's support for people in those situations that are going to lose those jobs into the future? Now, they did it when they shut down the car industry in Victoria and South Australia. They provided transitional support for people in those areas. Well, where's that for miners?
Well, let's just go back on a couple of points you made in that answer. Firstly, you said Labor's position on Adani before the election was clear. I would have thought that was completely at odds with reality. We know Labor's position on Adani was very unclear, and even your own election review, headed up by Jay Weatherill and our mate Emerson, our mate the former Minister Craig Emerson, talked about how that Adani cavalcade convoy led by the Greens damaged Labor in Queensland. So, I mean, obviously Labor needs to clarify its position on Adani, and we know now the mine has stacked up. It has passed all the hurdles. After the election, suddenly, miraculously, the state government there gave it all the approvals. It is going ahead. So can't you just simply tell Australians what Labor's view is of the Adani coal mine? Do you support this development and the jobs that will come from it?
Well, that was the position that we held prior to the election, and that was very clear. We said that on numerous occasions, Chris, that if it's stacked up environmentally and if it's stacked up in terms of it being able to be financed, then it would go ahead, and that's what's occurred. You know, the Greens cavalcade, well, that had nothing to do with the Labor Party. I accept that it did damage Labor's vote in Queensland, but that's not. That wasn't the Labor Party that put that show on the road. That was the Greens. Now we're coming to reality with that. That's why we're reviewing a lot of our policies. But we have to also accept the fact, I think, that this is a changing industry, and that there's been no support given by this government for people in that industry in the context of that change, and that's why you've got record unemployment in areas like Townsville and other areas. Well, what's the government been doing to support jobs for those people in those areas? Not much.
Well, I guess they would say they'd be supporting the mining industry and investment in those areas and investment in the Adani coal mine. And so hopefully those investments and those jobs will be created. Do you sometimes have to scratch yourself about the inanity, I suppose, of the public debate on many of these issues when it is seen as some revelation, some resetting of the debate, when your own leader just saying that our number one export industry is actually a worthwhile industry, and pointing out that if we don't sell this coal to the countries that demand it, they'll just get it from Indonesia or elsewhere anyway. I mean, it's a statement of the bleeding obvious, yet it seems so unusual.
Yeah, and that's the point that I'm trying to make, Chris. It is an important industry to Australia, both in terms of of exports and jobs. But the reality is that it's a changing industry because of those factors that I mentioned earlier. You know, who would have thought 10 years ago that BHP and Rio Tinto, the world's biggest miners, would move away from coal mining?
Yeah, but what's the problem with that? I mean, that's an observation you make, which is an accurate one, and good on them. They decide that coal's probably not worth the pain for them from their shareholder activists or whatever it is. And eventually, as you say, we may see a decline in the demand for coal, but that's not happening yet. There's still strong growth in coal. The point is that that's what businesses do. Let them make their choices about investments. The government shouldn't have a role in that.
And that's the point that I'm trying to make, that this is an industry that's changing, and that's why you're seeing job losses in these particular industries because of what's going on internationally, because of financing. The Adani mine was meant to be much bigger than it's eventually been, Chris, and the reason it's not is because they couldn't get finance in international investment markets. None of the Australian banks would back an investment like that because of the long-term risk about stranded assets, but also, as you mentioned, their investors are now enlivened and in action to these things and are forcing them into saying, no, we don't want you investing in those sort of industries. The other point to make
I don't
is
understand. You're talking Adani down now. I mean, I thought Labor was about creating jobs for workers and seeing investment in Australian industries, and yet now you want to talk down Adani. Shouldn't both major political parties saying it is a good thing that someone wants to invest billions of dollars in Australia and will give them all the encouragement they can to develop that basin and create jobs and export earnings for Australia?
Yeah, I am, and that's the point that I'm making, Chris, but the reality of the situation is that this is an industry that is changing, and I don't think that this government's gripped that reality yet, particularly around automation and particularly around the changing nature of investment markets.
But if they want to automate their business, if they want to invest more in automating their businesses, what business of that is there for government to interfere in that? Government should encourage investment, but yes, jobs are disappearing and moving around the economy in all sorts of sectors all day, every day. It's not for governments to stop that or prevent that or even comment on that, but they ought to encourage investment, surely.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But government should assist those people when they lose those jobs because of that change that's been brought about by automation or by changes in investment markets. And that's what this government has been very, very bad at when it comes to the mining sector. And that's why you go to Townsville. I've been to Townsville a few times, and you walk down the main street there, the number of vacant shops is quite scary. And we've had record levels of youth unemployment and high unemployment in these towns. Well, what's the government doing about it? Why aren't they supporting changes in this industry and transition for people who have to leave these jobs? They're not doing much at all.
What do you want them to do? They're encouraging investment. What else should government do?
Well, when people lose jobs, they can provide assistance packages and retraining packages. They did that in the automation industry, in car industry, in Victoria and South Australia. They should be looking at doing similar things in other industries where you're going to be affected in the manner that's going to be coming with the mining industry in Australia.
Okay, thanks for joining us, Matt Thistlethwaite. I appreciate it.
Cheers, Chris. Good on you.